So the name Caring for God's Acre actually comes from a Longfellow poem. Well, I like that ancient Saxon phrase, which calls the burial ground God's Acre, and I love the fact that we're named after a poem because I think it ties us into to history, and I think it's very important with burial grounds, churchyards, cemeteries, chapel yards, to always have in mind their history and how long they've been there. And I think part of that history is the history of people who cared for them. And as I hope I'll show to you in the next sort of few minutes, um, I think burial grounds are one of the biggest volunteering projects ever. Churchyards are. They're never described in those words. Other conservation charities use words like that. The church never does. But you know, there are hundreds of thousands of volunteers now, let alone going back down the centuries, who are caring for this very special place for everybody. So it's small potatoes, but I'd just like to say thank you. But I do think it's quite good to think of yourselves as links in the chain going back sometimes over well, over decades, centuries, and very occasionally over a millennia. But your links in the chain, keeping that place special, keeping it cared for, keeping it looked after, and that is an amazing thing. So no one knows quite how many burial grounds there are. They've got a pretty good idea, and they're getting a better idea at the moment, you know, with mapping things that are going on, digital mapping. But there's definitely over 25,000 of them across England and Wales. And that's equivalent to the area of a small national park, something like Exmoor National Park, or the Isle of Wight is another sort of equivalent one. So a big landowning, a big landholding, and really important. And unlike Exmoor National Park, let's see if the button works. No, it really isn't going to. They are not in one place. They are scattered everywhere, in every community, just about everywhere, apart from, as you can see from that map, the mountains are the only places where you don't have a church. These are churchyards mainly. There are some cemeteries on there too. This map is from the Church Heritage Record. And so almost all of those are Anglican churchyards. So they're amazing stepping stones for biodiversity. Amazing, because unlike Exmoor National Park, they're not in one place at one end of the country. They're all linked. They're all linked. And I think you could think of them in terms of habitat connectivity as maybe the center of a nerve cell from which spread out those dendrites going in every direction. And also they're incredibly important for species on the move, species that are supposed to be on the move, like migrating species, and species that are forced onto the move by change and by climate change. Ooh, come on. Somebody once told me that my talks are really full of really beautiful pictures, and they've got a rather boring churchyard, and that it isn't always sunny, and could I have something a bit more mundane? So here's my rather dull churchyard on a rather dull day to do that, and I just thought it's just quite useful to have a look at this. This is a Victorian churchyard. The volunteers, the church warden and co are trying to keep it mown short all over the place, and just sort of have a little look at what features are good about this fairly ordinary churchyard. Well, first of all, you can see quite a lot of mature trees. There's an awful lot behind the little bar on the right hand side with people on. So believe me, there's more mature trees. Most churchyards got very changed by the Victorians, who loved doing planting. So they'll probably have some mature trees, some veteran trees if they're short-lived, such as some of the conifers. Often have conifers. Victorians love planting conifers, but you've got big mature trees providing nesting, roosting, habitat for all sorts of things and shelter. Most churchyards have yews in them. And I've never been in a single burial ground with yews that didn't have a gold crest in. So have a listen next time, and if you're lucky, have a look. If we have a look at the grass, it looks pretty boring, doesn't it? Pretty green, not a lot there. But actually, that turf is in some state unimproved species-rich grassland. Almost all churchyards were consecrated before the widespread loss of this habitat, which is now down to about 3% from what it was pre-Second World War. Obviously, there are some that are younger and don't, but the majority of them will predate the last sort of 60 years when we've had such a widespread loss of this particular habitat. So the turf will be from that original grassland. It may not be managed very well, it may not be very full of species, but the fungi, the whole invertebrate structure within the soil is probably there, and there's a very good likelihood that there's a good seed bank and that things can come back. The exception, I've got to say, would be the kind of situation that we were talking about earlier, where you've become completely overrun with garden escapes. So that is a different situation. But on the whole, if you've managed to keep grassland, it's probably much, much more interesting than you think. And also, if you look at that, despite their best efforts, it's not very neat, is it? It's not very flat, level, and smooth. Hurrah, say I. I expect the person who's mowing it is cursing that. They're very, very difficult to keep neat. Very difficult because they're full of stones, and there's humpy bumpy bits, and there's places where the mower wouldn't go, and there's holes, and there's nooks, and there's crannies, and there's holes in chest tombs, and cracks in the ground where there's been subsidence, all of which, even if you're trying to keep it looking what you might feel is presentable, I would feel is manicured, all of which make amazing habitats. And then, of course, you've got all those stones there, including the church and the church wall, covered in lichens. So, all in all, even a fairly, as it were, boring churchyard has all sorts of places for plants, for birds, for invertebrates, for reptiles and amphibians, and much, much more. So I'm now going to just quickly run over sort of the three key things that I think churchyards are really special for. Come on, move. Yeah. So we have to start with the ancient and veteran yew trees of the churchyards of England and Wales. These are of global significance, globally important. No other country has anything like the collection of yew trees that we have. We love our trees as a nation, and we think of them as jolly old if they're about 300 or 400 years old. But I mean, look at the age of these yew trees. They really, really are very spectacular. Come on. You don't have an awful lot in Cornwall. I looked on the Ancient Yew Group map, their website and map to find this, which does it by county. So I may have got the diocese a bit wrong because obviously they don't follow the county lines. But more or less, these are the yew trees that popped up when I looked on their one. So if you are looking after any of them, fantastic. And if not, why not have a little trip and go and have a look at them? The part of the world where I live, which is the Welsh borders, is absolutely full of them. That's particularly down England and Wales. There's an awful lot. Come on. So, veteran or not, yew trees are fantastic and fantastic for birds. So come late summer and early autumn, do have a look out for birds feeding on the red flesh of the fruit, the aril, the only non-poisonous part. And in particular, look when the winter thrushes turn up, and if we're lucky, bullfinches with them. There are other veteran trees, of course, in churchyards. Young tiddlers, not nowhere near as old as the yews, but still, this is a very fantastic oak tree in Stafford. And I think one of the great things about churchyards is because they are in every community, it doesn't follow that the best wildlife is in the middle of nowhere. It's not up on the moors, it's not up on the mountains, it's not in the rivers. It's bang in the middle of towns and often cities. So this is an urban site and it's got that tree in it. Isn't that amazing? The next important thing that I think people often don't talk about is the churchyard wall. And your church has probably been rebuilt quite a lot of times. It might be an ancient site. It might be an ancient pagan site. It might have been going for even longer as a religious and important place to the community. And after a church, it becomes consecrated, the church is placed there. Quite soon after, some sort of boundary goes up to mark that land. So it might have been a hedge or a fence, but probably quite early on, particularly in a sort of rather stony county, it will be a wall. And the church since then might have been rebuilt half a dozen times. It might have started off as a sort of, something not much more than a wooden shed or wattle and daub, and now it's a, Victorian stone number. But that wall will have been mended, might have been added to, it might have been an extension, might have had a hole in it, but basically it will be the same wall from when there was first a church there and when that ground was first consecrated. So just have a good look at it. Have a look at all the nooks and crannies. Have a look at the lichens. Have a look at the holes and the gaps and all of the quite rich ecosystem that is in and on the wall. They're terrific places for amphibians and reptiles, particularly dry stone walls, and Cornish walls would be the same, because they're full of holes, full of nooks and crannies, full of overwintering places, and you will find a lot of slow worms are found in churchyards, but also frogs, newts, toads, and quite often lizards. Haha, there is a frog. Can't remember what order my slides are in. I can't see them anymore. So what else have I got? So as well as the walls, so for a long time in churchyards, we just had an empty churchyard. It might have had a preaching cross in it. There might have been outdoor services there. There might have been festivals. There might have been all sorts of things going on, fairs, archery practice. And the Lord of the Manor would have been put in the crypt with a beautiful bronze or a beautiful statue, and everyone else would have been buried without a permanent marker. But from the 17th century on, when we became more of a bourgeoisie, we became less feudal. It became more normal for more people to want to have a permanent marker if they could afford it. And I don't know whether anybody at the time went, there goes our open space. I think these things probably crept up on them gradually, and then it was lost. But it was the most fantastic time for lichens, because if you were to sort of plan a piece of ground for lichens, you would probably plan a churchyard. So you'd have a nice wall and a stone church on which there were some lichens already, and then you'd put a whole load of different stones in at slightly different orientations, using some different materials, and you'd cut all sorts of nooks and crannies and crevices and carvings in them in order to make different, just slightly different microhabitats in which different lichens can live. And that is exactly what monuments are. So just to give you a little bit of background, there's about 2,000 lichen species in the UK. And they do look incredibly similar. They're very hard to identify. You often need to look at them under a microscope and things like that. And about 700 of those, so roughly a third, are found in burial grounds, many of which are rare or seldom found anywhere else, particularly in a county that doesn't have natural rocky outcrops, unlike Cornwall. And it's quite common for a churchyard to have over 100 lichen species in. So they're really very special, and they basically just need to be left alone and avoid those herbicides that we were talking about earlier. Avoid chemicals, and don't let them. If you have to move stones for any reason, maybe in the wall or rebuilding, try and put them back at the same orientation. So I mentioned briefly the sort of flowery grassland, the turf of my so-called boring churchyard, but just a little bit more about that. So this piece of land was enclosed whenever it was consecrated, and from then on in, it has been grassland. It has been grassland. It used to be a hay crop. A hay crop was taken, and then the grass would have been kept short, probably by grazing a few sheep, maybe a vicar's pony, that sort of thing. We know it was a hay crop because we can see that the hay was part of the vicar's stipend. Something that I every now and again suggest now, and vicars don't like that idea one little bit. And there's also moments where the bishop tells a vicar off for planting turnips or something like that, and tells them that won't do, and they mustn't grow crops in it. So we know that it's been grassland, cut as a hay crop with a scythe, raised with animals, now cut with a mower and strimmers often. But it's still grassland, it's still managed grassland. And that, I think, is really crucial and quite rare in our very busy and changing country. I just put that picture in because it's nice, I think. I don't think I had anything particular to say about it. Oh no, I did. So a churchyard in Shropshire, near where I'm based, during lockdown, they had a very, very lucky thing in that a benefactor who'd grown up there and now has a big factory in Wolverhampton sends their grounds team down every 2 weeks in the summer and mows the churchyard. The vicar couldn't be happier. Everyone's very delighted, apart from those who'd like to see the wildflowers allowed to flower, because they whiz down with a trailer and a big ride-on mower and roar around and whiz off again. And then in lockdown, of course, they couldn't do that. And then after lockdown, their mower broke, and it was a fancy Italian one, and they couldn't get the parts because, as you remember, we couldn't get anything, could we? And then the Suez Canal meant we couldn't get anything from anywhere. And so it went unmown for several months and it popped up orchids. It popped up orchids. Nobody knew that was there. We knew it was good species rich grassland, and we've been saying it would be lovely if we could just stop mowing that bit and just see. Could see a lot of common species like oxeye daisy, but no one knew it was going to come up with orchids. So you never know what's there until you let things grow long for a year or two and have a look. Also, and this is a common myth, people think, well, we must, if we're going to have grassland, we must let it grow, we must let it set seed. It's lovely if it does. It's lovely if it does. Seed goes all over the place and all sorts of things can eat that seed, but it's not true. You don't need to let it set seed. These are meadow plants, they're perennials, they spread vegetatively. They don't actually need to flower and set seed, although, of course, you won't get any of the invertebrates and small birds and mammals if they don't. So this is Shrewsbury Cemetery. Shrewsbury Cemetery was, for several decades, mown to within an inch of its life by 6 groundsmen wielding mowers and strimmers. And then come austerity, they cut down to 2, and the old Victorian part, they stopped managing anywhere near as intensively and focused on the places where there were recent and current burials taking place. Keep that very short, very appropriately. And then they made lovely winding paths through it. And this is year one. This is year one, having been kept very short for decades. This is how many flowers and plants were there, just spreading vegetatively, quietly there, waiting for their moment, never setting seed. Come on. Oh. Lots of people have short grass in their churchyards, either all over the place or in part of it. I certainly have never been in a churchyard where I haven't thought it would be appropriate to have some short grass in some areas around current burials, around the entrance, against the paths. There's places where it's definitely the right thing to do. And as I've said, it will still have all sorts of species in. It will have all sorts of species underground as well. And it will have very likely excellent grassland fungi, which you'll be able to see because they're in nice short grass, so they're easy to see. So do have a look in the autumn, see if there's a mycologist living in your community who'd like to come and have a look and see what you can find, because these are a really good indicator of ancient grassland. Wax caps, earth tongues, spindles, things like that. Also, churchyards are brilliant for what I think of as common species, and some of them still are there. That robin still is common, but species that were common, like hedgehog, but now are not so common and are decreasing in many areas and are a concern. And we're all going, well, why is that? Churchyards remain excellent for these common species, and often you'll find that surrounding a churchyard, there's people with gardens who might be feeding the birds, they might have a garden pond, they might be doing all sorts of things for nature, but it's the churchyard or the cemetery is where part of the life, the sort of annual life of that creature is spent. So frogs and newts and toads, for example, spend most of the year out of water, and the churchyard is perfect for them because it's full of invertebrates and it isn't treated with chemicals. Lots of birds might nest or overwinter or shelter in the big trees that you find in a churchyard whilst going into gardens to feed. So when somebody will go, oh, I've got my robin coming to my garden, it might well be nesting in the churchyard, might well be your robin. They're also really good places for people, and they are the place, I think, where the church and the community can meet very happily, very easily, without anxiety from the people who perhaps bring some baggage about going into a church or bring baggage about religion. In surveys done, we found that there's more people who go into a churchyard just simply to be there, simply to be in that peaceful green space, whether it's eat their lunchtime sandwiches, have a first walk after getting a hip replacement where something's nice and flat and level and smooth and there's a bench, rock the baby to sleep, having dropped the kids off at nursery, whatever it is. And when you ask them why they're there, they'll say the peace, the tranquility, the birdsong, the flowers, things like that. They don't, interestingly, say the very neat short mown grass. But anyway, Moving on. So more people are going in to simply be in that lovely green space than are going in to go into the church building, either to attend a service or to just visit it as a historic building or to visit a known grave. So it is the place that your community is already very familiar with, probably, particularly since lockdown. They probably love it and they probably feel strongly about it. And you may know that, or you may not. Some churches do, some churches don't. But it is a really good neutral meeting space, and it is possible to garner that interest and turn it into action if you're lucky. Brilliant places for activities. Fantastic. And we were hearing about education resources that the diocese is producing, which is really good to hear about. We also have education resources on our website that are quite generic, that are useful, but very simple things: leaf bingo, symbol scavenger hunts, sticking bits of leaf on cards like these brownies have just done. It doesn't need to be rocket science, and they're very nice places. They're nicely enclosed. There's often a loo. There's seats usually. They're good for all sorts of ages and abilities. And I think it's quite unusual to be able to come up really close to nature in a place that's very accessible. So I think that's something we should all really celebrate and make use of. And as well as sort of an activity with a theme and resources and a risk assessment and all of that stuff that comes with an activity, they're just great places to just be and spend time, and maybe spend time with friends, and just soak in the atmosphere and soak in the beauty of the place. Something that you can do if you're not already involved in it, that we'd love you to do, is Churches Count on Nature, which you can't read that slide very well, but it takes place in the second week of June every year. This is the fourth year that it's been running. We've been running something called Love Your Burial Ground Week for a long time, which is basically a celebration of burial grounds, celebration of the volunteers, and just encouraging people to do something, large or small, whatever they like, in this week. But we've teamed up with the Church of England, the Church in Wales, and also a Rocha, who we were speaking about Eco Church earlier. So you're obviously very familiar with a Rocha. And we together run Churches Count on Nature during Love Your Burial Ground Week. And basically the idea of it is to just encourage people to use their churchyard for some sort of nature spotting, something, and ideally make a biological record, which is easier than it sounds from that rather mouthful of a name. But really, it's about going out and looking and enjoying and seeing what's there and joining in. So if you're not already aware of it, please have a look on our website, which is where all the details are. So far, we've got these are signed up within Cornwall. So I expect you're all planning and you're going to be signing up very soon, or you signed up since I pulled that slide off our website. But please, it can be extremely low key. It can be a group of friends going out with a flower book or listening to birdsong. It doesn't need to be more than that. It doesn't need to be big. Or some people really go for it and do stuff with the schools and run guided walks and do all sorts of things. But I'd start small. And to just give you a bit of an idea of the scale of it, so in the previous years, as I say, we've run it for 3 years now. We estimate that 24,000 people plus have been involved. So it's really captured the imagination, particularly did in 21, because there was so little else going on that people were very excited to be able to do something. But the other years have been very, very popular too. And we're getting an awful lot of biological information from it. It's not rarities on the whole. As you look, the top scorers are things like daisy, squirrel, blackbird. So we're not necessarily, people aren't finding rarities. But in order to understand how nature's changing, we need to record, we need to write down, we need to know what's there. And the common things often are the ones that tell us at least as much as the rarities. So that is really useful. And as you can see, 2,774 different species. That's not bad, is it? Goodness me, who knew there was so much there? So it's shedding a light, and it's allowing people like myself to be able to say to decision makers, this is a very important place for biodiversity, and it's a very important place for the community to be involved and to be close to nature and get all of those benefits from nature that we now know are so important to all of us. Biological recording sounds a bit scary, but it's very easy. You can ideally, we'd love you to use smartphones or tablets and use an app called iNaturalist. We'd love you to do that. There's various reasons for that. One is it helps you identify, you take a photo of something and it makes some suggestions of what it is. So it helps with that. But unlike other apps that do that too, this one then turns that into a biological record. It goes into the systems that exist for biological records, rather than just you going, "All right, oh, well, that was interesting," which is what other recording apps do that offer you some selections. It's very good now. The more it's used, the better they get, these apps. So it's very good at identification now. Whereas if people tried it a few years ago, it was much less good. And it is easy to use, and it's particularly easy for the young to use. So a lot of fun can be had encouraging the young to use this system. And also because it relies on a photo, when you submit a biological record, an expert needs to verify whether it's correct or not. And if they can see a photo, they can go, oh yes, they say it's this, I can see it is, tick. Whereas if somebody they've never heard of says, well, I saw this, they're kind of like, I have no idea if you did or didn't. So it's much easier to get it through the process. But for people who go, I absolutely hate apps, I haven't got a smartphone and I've written it all in a notebook, that's fine. You can email it to us. You can even post it to us. The main thing is that you're out, you're nature spotting, you're taking part, you're exploring these wonderful places. If you are prepared to give iNaturalist a go, we've got resources on our website to help. So do have a look. There's some little mini films of some of my colleagues working their way through them. So hopefully that'll help. And these records, these biological records, they end up, it takes ages, absolutely ages, so don't hold your breath for this, but they end up in something called the National Biodiversity Network, which is a pulling together of biological records from all sorts of different organisations like Butterfly Conservation and the Botanical Society and the Lichen Society. So it's an umbrella organisation that pulls them together. And they end up here. And here we are slowly but surely drawing up a national database of burial grounds and how good they are for biodiversity. And I just whipped out one here just to sort of show you, give you a bit of an idea. And this is actually at Canterbury Cathedral. So if you expand that map of green dots, that's all the burial grounds. The greenness indicates how many species have been found in them. If you expand it out and you find Canterbury Cathedral and click on it, you'll find that they've got a hairy-footed flower bee, swift, a worm slug, rosemary beetle, hedgehog, bluebell, lily beetle, and squirrel. So Canterbury Cathedral, the grounds around it must be one of the most manicured and managed and walked on spots that there is. But even there, you've got information there that is useful to you if you were the site manager of the grounds around Canterbury Cathedral. Hairy-footed flower bee, that is a bee that comes out very early, so it needs early pollen. So you might go, aha, what have we got in our flower bed? Let's make sure we've got some flowers that bees can access that come out very early for that particular species, because that's a beautiful little thing. Swift, okay, where are they nesting? Are they nesting on the cathedral? Are they just buzzing around it? Is there a place for nest boxes, or should we know where they're nesting in case we have to mend the roof? Most importantly, even more important than swift boxes. So that just alerts you that you've got to take care. You've got something very special there and you need to make sure you look after it. If you need to do some work, it's probably looking after itself. But if you need to do any change, any roof repairs, you really need to know that's there. Hedgehog, you can click on it and see when it was found. And I clicked on the hedgehog thing going, oh, I bet it was 20 years ago. And it wasn't, it was last year. It was last year. So hedgehog's trundling around the middle of Canterbury, chomping things. So you can sort of think to yourself, well, could I put a wood pile, a dead wood pile somewhere? Possibly not in the grounds of Canterbury Cathedral, but there might be somewhere that they could just to boost a bit of habitat for that hedgehog. And bluebell, that's the native bluebell, so that's lovely to see. So again, you might think, okay, well, we might plant some more of those, or we might have a little bit of woodland cover so they can spread naturally. So even in a very urban, very manicured space, there's stuff to be learnt on how to manage it by looking at the record and seeing what's been seen. So it's very useful. So that's what happens to your records. They go to this portal, the NBN Atlas. It takes ages, as I said, but they do go there in the end. And they also go onto the Church Heritage Records, which any of you have had the joy of recently applying for a faculty, you'll be extremely familiar with and probably love it very much indeed. And we've been working with the church to put on 4 new fields onto the Church Heritage Record, which is mainly about built heritage, mainly about the church building itself and the amazing built heritage to be found within it. But we've added on some biological information. So there's now, you can now see what veteran trees there are within your churchyard, be it yews or other species. You can see if there are any designations. Is it a local wildlife site, for example? There's a summary of all the species that have been found, just, numbers of birds, numbers of animals, that sort of thing. So you don't end up with a massive great list of lichen, wondering what on earth it all means, just to pull it into something a bit more meaningful. And there's also what we call seek advice species, of which swift would be one. Many of them are protected legally. And if you're doing some work, you really, really want to know in advance that they're there, because then you can go, okay, I know we've got, let's say, slow worm. I know we've got great crested newts. We must think about them when we're doing our planning. And similarly, the DAC needs to think about them when they're deciding whether or not to grant a faculty. So hopefully you'll see that by going out with a smartphone and some kids and going, there's a squirrel, there's a molehill, you're part of a process that's pulling together information that really can help us to manage for biodiversity in all that we do within these amazing sites. Come on. Oh, it doesn't want to move now. Yes, so please get involved, large or small, couple of friends like this, sporting their excellent hats, or a great big event with all sorts of people. We'll send you some resources. If you book in and register, you can ask for some free resources, which will pop in the post. A Field Studies Council, one of those fold-out charts, and also this starter guide, which doesn't only come in Welsh. I've only just noticed that that's in Welsh. But it's a cardboard thing with a ring binder, and it's good for kids. They can run about with it and wave it about and get it all tatty and covered in mud, and that's great. We'll send you out another one next year, just to help you get going. And there's also quite a lot of ideas on the website, quite a lot of things that you can download and either print out or just use. And this is data from, it includes Churches Council Nature, but it comes from a project that we ran called the Beautiful Burial Ground, of which Churches Council Nature was part, where we ran many activities for people in churchyards and cemeteries. People of all sorts, in all sorts of areas, right across England and Wales, including a lot of people for whom this was an amazingly accessible site because they had a lot of access needs and mobility needs. And we asked them how, what they felt at the end of their sessions, and we've got over 1,000 responses here. So we feel it's quite a strong piece of consultation, strong piece of data. And the degree to which they loved it amazed us, actually. We knew they'd like it, particularly when they're at the end of the session. People usually do. It's an anonymous form, so some of them said they didn't. But the degree to which they absolutely loved doing something in this historic and special space was quite an eye-opener, actually. And so over 90% said they loved it. We've given 1 to 5, they went for 5. Didn't, and 75% had never done something like this before. So running some sort of activity around the heritage, around the wildlife, is a really good place to bring a new audience to your churchyard. And also, nearly 60% of them said they'd like to volunteer. Now, most of our activity was being run in the summer, and they just had a lovely time looking at wildflowers or listening to birdsong. So I'm not going to promise you that come January, when you say, would you all who gave us your email addresses like to come out to help clear up, that you're going to get 60% of them back. But you know, say you get 10%. Say 10% actually go, yeah, I did actually. You opened my eyes to what an interesting place it is. I really care about nature. I will come out. That's useful, isn't it? And at the point of being asked, 60% of them did intend to come and help. So, and I also think you never know what you do and how it's going to impact on people. And I just think that this photo sort of shows, you know, the child father to the man, really. Then we've got absolute small nerd cub boy peering at the ground, and then we've got an adult entomologist looking at a micro moth. So you just don't know. If you set somebody off on a journey, start off by looking at a squirrel or looking at a tree or playing leaf bingo or whatever it is, you just don't know how that's going to affect them and whether that's going to turn out to be the thing that ignited their enthusiasm and the thing that becomes their passion as an adult. And I think, oh, and that's me. Thank you very much.
That was brilliant, Harriet. That was so interesting, and it's really, you know, opened our eyes and given us all sorts of great ideas for things that we can take forward, particularly next month with the getting registered for the Count on Nature and the Love Your Burial Ground week, which is great. Let's go for some questions now. Let's go to Andrew first, and then to David, who I know had got a question in chat. I don't know whether you still got that question.
Yes. Do you need mobile reception to use iNaturalist? I believe not. But I must admit, I don't know how to do it, but my colleagues do. You take photos, and you can later upload them. You can upload them at home. So you do need mobile reception if you're going to do it on the spot and go, you know, maybe with a child and then go click, there you go. But if you just take a series of photos when you're there, you can then go back and plug into Wi-Fi and do it at home.
Great, thank you, Harriet.
And if that isn't clear to you how, I can find somebody who can explain it to you, but that's not me, I'm afraid.
Brilliant. Andrew, over to you.
Hi, Harriet. Andrew Hill. I've actually been involved at the Gibner Prayer Chapel, which is just outside Helston, which was a Methodist building. We're very different in that we're not a burial ground. The garden's only been there for about 15 years because the farmer gave us a corner of the field, and we've got just very small area. But as a lifelong bird watcher, and generally I've been fascinated seeing how many species we get in our little ground. I have problems with things like lichens, but never mind. I'm aware that there are many species that are in the garden that you don't see in June, either flowers that bloom before or after, or and birds that visit, and you know, they're only winter visitors or whatever. Has there any thought been done about capturing species other parts of the year? Because I mean, obviously the records are very biased if you only got them from 1 week of the year.
Yes, I mean, Churches Council on Nature, in a way, I mean, it's a bit of a publicity thing. It's a galvanized interest. It's a communication tool. But really, what we would love is people to be out there recording, looking all year round, and making biological records. That would be fantastic. And using iNaturalist, or some people use iRecord if they're used to doing records, that works for them. Birders use BirdTrack. You know, there's other ways as well, but iNaturalist is a very people-friendly one for first-time recorders particularly. But yeah, we would love people to be out all year round, and we do encourage people at other times of year, but that's our sort of, yeah, as it were, it's slightly our equivalent of the big garden bird count, you know. Similarly, that's in January, isn't it? So again, you know, not the best time of year for an awful lot of species that aren't even in the country, but still a really good way of engaging people and bringing them into the idea of it, and then perhaps they keep looking all year round. And similarly, you know, your site, which isn't a burial ground, certainly isn't an old burial ground, I mean, yes, we'd love you to get involved. We'd love you to join in. It won't turn up on the system for burial grounds, the NBN system, but who cares? You know, you can have a really great activity. You can join in. You can register with us. You can do all sorts of things. And yes, please do. The other thing that some churches do who don't have much land, don't have a burial ground, is they go to the burial ground that they do use, or to the local one. So they'll run a church-based activity, but they'll say, rather than, you know, us looking at the planter next to the car park in some cases, we're going to go to the local cemetery and we're going to have a walk around and we're going to see what we can find, but we're going to do it as a community. So you know, it doesn't also need to be tied to your own piece of land. You can use it as a bit of a day out to somewhere that's perhaps, you know, is larger, got more to look at. But it sounds like yours has got rather a lot.
We got plenty to look at. Yes, and particularly because, I mean, no mow May is brilliant, because if you do that as well, by the time you get to June, you've got you know, you can identify far more flowers than you would if you mowed the lawn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks very much.
What about ivy, Harriet? What do we do? Do we remove it or do we leave it?
Ah, yes, the ivy question. Yes. Okay, so ivy is brilliant and awful in equal measure. It's not rare, that's one thing. It's a very, very common plant. But nice thick ivy, flowering, buzzing with ivy bees in the autumn, covered in berries, excellent habitat, excellent nesting and sheltering habitat. So it is also very good. Ivy on monuments kills off the lichens. It shades them out. They don't like that. So if you've got old wall with all sorts of other plants and lichens and things like that on, I would advise you stopping ivy from encroaching if you can. I'd advise trimming it so that where it's already there, perhaps, and dense, and it's already created that habitat and shaded out that lichens, that, you know, it's fine. But perhaps stop it encroaching further. Also, if it's on monuments, of course, you can't read them if it's covered in ivy. But ivy is also protective. A simple monument, a simple headstone under thick ivy will be much more legible if you clear that ivy off than its neighbour that has been out in the elements. That's both air pollution, but more importantly, just simple erosion, wind, rain, sea spray, whatever it is. Just nibbling away at the rock. So if you've got a simple headstone, it's actually very protective. So if you've got a whole load of headstones covered in ivy and nobody is particularly wanting to read them or photograph them that year, I'd leave it be. When it becomes a problem, it's if you've got a complex monument, if you've got a chest tomb, if you've got a cross, if you've got something with joints, it pushes into the joints and it opens them up. Similarly, if you've got a dry stone wall, it's pushing in and it's opening up. So the ivy then has both made that monument or wall unstable and is also holding it together. So you need to be extremely careful removing it. And the advice from Historic England is, if you're going to remove ivy from a monument where it's got a thick covering, you need to know that you can mend what you find underneath. So say you've got a chest tomb and it's covered in ivy, there's quite a likelihood that it could fall apart with those huge big stones coming off. So really, you know, be very careful. Don't do it, honestly, but be prepared to mend that tomb or to accept its loss. And similarly across, you peel all the ivy off, it may fall apart. So very mixed blessing, quite a complicated answer. I'm sorry about that. But really what I would say is think why you're removing the ivy. If you've got something with a lot of ivy on and you think I should remove it just because I feel I should, unpick that in your mind. Go, okay, we've got monuments covered in ivy. Have we got anybody who's wanting to read them at the moment? Is there somebody doing a local history project who's going to photograph them all? In which case, let's all strip off the ivy and get them photographed, get them, you know, get that moment in time done. And then maybe the ivy maybe you'll be able to keep it under control. Maybe it will come back because it's a lot of work to remove. And similarly, a wall, you might go, okay, it's covered in ivy, we'll trim it, but we won't take it off, because otherwise we'll probably have to rebuild that wall. And at the moment, we don't have the resources to do that. Or you might go, well, we're building another bit of the wall, so let's strip the ivy off and rebuild the whole thing in one go. So have a good reason. Have a good reason for changing what you do with ivy. The exception to that is yews. I would advise removing ivy from yews, because they're so slow growing that the ivy can really strangle them. It can wrap around the boughs or the trunk and just stop them expanding with time. So I would try and keep it off yews of any age, but other trees only take it off if an arborist tells you to, which they sometimes do, because they often say, well, I can't see with the health of your tree properly because of the ivy. I can't see if it's safe, so we're going to have to get the ivy off in order to do a proper safety assessment of the tree. But other than that, you can let it be.
Can I ask a question?
Very interesting. Go on, Lorna.
You know the policy, the Carrowmore Council, if they manage a churchyard, they have a 3 times a year cut policy. So early, after July, and then autumn. This after July one, I worry about quite a lot, because everything's at its seeding, and then everything's chopped down, and all the buzzing and the bees and are all suddenly it's all flattened. So I'm more keen on the spring and autumn cut, but leaving the summer growth. What do you think?
I mean, on the face of it, 3 cuts a year sounds quite good in a county like Cornwall, where you've got growth all year round.
Right.
I mean, cutting it is brutal. You're right. You know, a traditional farmer cutting a lovely flowery hay meadow, 1 minute it's there buzzing with life, the next minute it's cut. It is quite brutal. But if you don't cut enough, then the flowers will slowly be replaced by coarser grass. But I wonder whether they rake. I bet they don't. I'll be amazed if they do.
No, they don't. They don't.
No.
Yeah.
So
just-
but the first thing I would try and do is I would try and rake after them. If you can, get volunteers out and rake. That is the single most useful thing you could do. But you could talk to them. It used to be the case that people would say, we can't talk to the council, we can't find who to talk to. They use subcontractors who use subcontractors who use subcontractors, and it's hopeless. It's really, you know, and that can still be the case, but an awful lot are far more enlightened now.
Yeah.
And you can find someone to talk to, and you could go, could we try leaving this bit without the summer cut and just doing the autumn and spring, and we'll rake and see how it does. But if it's you're starting to get more lush growth, taller growth, species like, if you know them, Falto's oakgrass, cocksfoot.
We got quite a lot of ant hills, lots and lots.
Yeah, well, that's a
hills.
sign of an ancient meadow. That's great. That's great to hear that you've got those.
Yeah,
But if you're starting to get a lot of cocksfoot, say, and false oakgrass, and it's starting to be like 3 or 4 foot high rather than
it is
18 at 2 foot high, it's probably, it needs that summer cut. Although I do agree with you, it is rather brutal. I mean, almost definitely there'll be some bits around the edge that they don't cut, and there'll be some scrubby bits in the corner where things can overwinter. And if not, you could ask them to leave a strip that you know that you cut yourselves every other year or something like that, which would create that sort of shelter and overwintering. But it on the whole, sites tend to be either overmanaged in that they're mown every 2 weeks, or undermanaged in that people don't want to do a summer cut. I mean, it's terribly hard to do a summer cut because you do cut flowers, and it's a bit heartbreaking. But you know, if you're mimicking an old-fashioned farming, you're mimicking a hay meadow, and a farmer will cut when the grass is at its vigorous, you know, it's most vigorous, when there's most energy in the grass, before that energy's gone down into the roots to be stored. So they will absolutely cut it June or July. So you don't want to leave it until the grasses are going yellow.
Harriet, that was brilliant. I think we're going to need to move on now, but may I just say, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. That was so interesting and informative, and that was really, really brilliant, Harriet. Thank you so much. We've enjoyed that very much indeed. found it very helpful. Thank you. Right, we've just got a few minutes left. Let's move over to Rosie, who will do the notices.
Yeah, so I think our first big ask, please, is whether people can complete their energy footprint tools. We've only had a 15% return rate so far. We are aiming for 80% by the closure, which is on the 31st of July. So please, could you complete that? If anybody's stuck, please just email me. If you don't want to do it online, I can provide you with a paper form. And basically, probably it'll be your treasurer who will have access to your utility records. So maybe you could just mention it to your treasurer. And if they're stuck, say, get in touch with Rosie and I will be able to help. My other notice was Christian Aid Week starts on Sunday, already said that. There's a lot of resources still on the website. Even if you just want to pray for Christian Aid Week, there's a journal with a prayer every day. So do have a look on there. You might find something there for yourself. I was going to mention about the Church's Count of Nature. Obviously, we've just heard that from Harriet. But also Harriet also has been involved in some webinars the Church of England are putting together with Caring for God's Acre. And they've got a lot in June, and I will put them on our newsletter. So there's kind of things like Harriet's going to be talking about knowing your aunt from your elder, your church, your swifts, ancient yew trees, bees, solitary bees. So there's a lot of interesting webinars coming up in June. And finally, I was just going to mention about our next gathering. It's going to be an evening one. It's on Thursday, the 13th of June at 7 o'clock. And we've got Jamie Russell coming. He's from 0 Hour. If you look on the website, they're doing an awful lot of campaigning on the climate and nature bill. So I think he will be really good to listen to if you're interested in campaigning. And we've also got some paper resources which we'll be able to circulate. So do encourage you to come along to that gathering. I think it'd be very good. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rosie. And can we just mention Cornwall Wildlife Trust hustings, which are continuing? There've been 2 so far. The third one is actually tomorrow. That's for the Falmouth constituency, and that's in Truro.
It's actually at the university. Tomorrow evening, it's Truro and Falmouth constituency.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Then at the end of the month, on the 28th of, oh, sorry, no, that's the end of next month. The next one is at the end of June, 28th of June, when there's the St Austell and Newquay constituency hustings, and then it follows on with Cornwall North and Cornwall South East in the months to come. If any of you go to a husting and you'd like to write a short piece for the newsletter, then I say Ben thinks that would be just great. So just do bear that in mind. And I know that Cornwall Wildlife Trust has produced 5 critical questions. I don't know whether now, yes, Duncan's holding it up at the moment. Did you want to say anything about that? It's a bit hard to read from that distance. You're on mute, Duncan. Duncan, you're on mute.
I'm just getting there. Yeah, I was just give me a moment. Yeah, there's 5 questions. You can get them off the website. But it's a nice, easy guide. It's not just for the hustings, but if you just wanted to put the questions, if you happen to arrange a meeting or whatever with your candidates, I think they're good questions. I mean, do you want me to read them, Julia, or not?
Why not? Yeah, go
on. How are you going to reverse the continuing decline in wildlife? What is your plan to tackle the terrible pollution in Cornwall's rivers and seas? What measures would you take to increase nature-friendly farming? What actions are you taking on the climate emergency? How are you planning to make sure everyone in your constituency is able to enjoy nature locally? They're quite good questions to get the ball rolling anyway.
It's good little aid memoir if you're just going to write to your MP or have a word with your local councillor. It's really really
Can-
useful. Thank
can
you
I
for
just
that.
quickly
Thank
say
you,
that-
Duncan. Yes.
Can I just quickly say that the diocese is actually liaising with Cornwall Wildlife Trust. We're going to be using their questions, so we'll be able to circulate that cards around to everybody. So that's happening very soon.
Smashing. Thank you, Rosie. So now we're coming up to midday. So let us join together to close with the Creation Care prayer. And as usual, at the end of each verse, we say together, we remember the goodness of God. So, Creator God, in bright light and dull darkness, in the energy of each day and the rest that comes with night, we remember the goodness of God. In the heavens high above our heads, in waters that run deep around the world, we remember the goodness of God. In solid land and flowing seas, in vivid flowers and fruit-laden trees, we remember the goodness of God. In the rising and setting of the sun and the cycles of the seasons, in the patterns of the shining stars, we remember the goodness of God. In oceans teeming with fish, in skies filled with birds, we remember the goodness of God. In a world filled with animal life and in ourselves as human beings, we remember the goodness of God. And God looked and saw all that he had made, and indeed it was very, very good. In rest and reflection, in work, wonder and worship, we remember the goodness of God. Amen. Well, thank you so much, and on that lovely note, say thank you so much for coming. Thank you for contributing. Particular thanks to Harriet, who's now gone, and a massive thanks to Rosie for making it all happen. So thank you very much to you. So have a wonderful month, everyone. Blessings to all, and bye-bye, and see you soon. And thank you for putting up with me. That's it. And thank goodness Ben's back next month.